We're about to start the final session of today, and I just maybe start by saying that in regard to the steering group, we've had a number of people who have indicated their interest in being on, citizen members indicated their interest in being on the steering group. So we will have to have an election, which I think in a constitutional convention is a very good thing. But we will, could I ask that by the end, when we finish at 5:30, if anyone else who hasn't yet indicated they wish to be involved, they wish to be on, to be considered for it, would they indicate to Art or myself, and then we'll finalise the list. At that point, we will have, when we have a final list, we will circulate that list this evening over dinner, and people can decide to vote, and we will then, the steering committee will, the 5 members of the steering committee will be announced tomorrow in the final session when we get into rules and procedure. I should say as well that we probably, similarly as for convention members, we may need, if you like, a substitute list for the steering committee. So if some people don't get on, as they won't, because there are more places than there are more people who want to be on the steering committee than there are places, we may have a substitute list as well. Okay, so if we now proceed to, as before, with feedback, and this is the first feedback, and as before we're dealing with social media, Kira Begley, watching from Paris, just one of, I think, quite a few people watching this from outside Ireland. This comment from Kieran Ling, the politicians dominating discussion, what's being done to include everybody. Well, you know, we've just started on the first day. We have had a higher proportion of politicians than of citizens speaking. But as I said at the beginning, I will be asking people to speak in this session and right up till the end of tomorrow, and indeed right up till the end of the Constitutional Convention, who haven't spoken before. So I think this issue will sort itself out as we go, but obviously I would encourage citizen members to contribute, as many of you have already. And then there is mixed social media opinion on the term of president, the notion that the issue is not important. Now this is a comment that's been made about this issue. I mean, I don't think I share it myself, but I think the point is really that there are many other more important issues in the country that should be considered. So I think that's where that comment is coming from. So now, if we can move on then to the arguments. The clicker is here. Okay. Do I need to operate it? Okay. Robert can operate it. So these are the arguments for. If we spend a little time looking at it, we have one slide for and one slide the arguments against. So as before, in terms of the important issues here, maybe I could again choose. What about the idea there of one term and no re-election? And could I ask table 6, who I don't think have spoken up to now, could you, somebody from table 6, comment?
Thank you very much. Brian McLaughlin. Yeah, I just raised the point, maybe have one term, no re-election is a possibility, but if it was uncontested the first term, that it wouldn't continue for 14 years uncontested, maybe after 2 or 3 years into the second term, there might be another election as a possibility. Instead of just reducing it to 5 years, you could have 10 years without going through the voting process again.
Okay. You said that. Yeah, thank you, Brian, for that. Anyone else want to speak on this table 2? Anyone from table 2 wish to comment on this?
Kieran Egan, we just went for the one-term no re-election because we thought the 14 years is too long, and we had the option of 2 5-year terms or 1 7-year term, not coinciding with local government or European elections.
Okay. The issue, now this may appear on the second as well, well, maybe not. The idea at the very last bullet point there, that the terms should be reduced but don't match, I presume that means don't align with the other elections. Is that what that means? Well, if it does, if that is, could I ask Table 3 to comment on that?
Aileen McDonough. We felt that we were inconclusive in terms of reducing the term. There were 2 for, 2 against, and 2 undecided. But we did feel that if it was reduced, we shouldn't match with the other elections because it may politicise it too much.
Okay. Now, the second bullet point there says more people may vote. I assume that means that if the 3 elections were held at the same time, more people would vote. Is that what that means? Okay. In that case, Table 8, could we have comment? Whoever, the proponents of this point of view from Table 8, could we have a comment?
Erin Bauman, I'm the facilitator for this table. The general sentiment, this was, I suppose, a bit more of a side issue, but the general consensus was, amongst those who had an opinion on it, that it might increase somewhat the turnout if the number of years was lessened, if it was dropped down to 5. As for alignment, there wasn't really much of a sentiment on that. There wasn't a whole lot of agreement, but I think that was kind of the summary of it, yeah.
Okay.
Catherine Murphy, just to say that the thing that we felt that would increase turnout most would be content. The relevance of the election is what, or the irrelevance of the election, we felt was the thing that was the most important factor in people turning out, and the fact that turnout is falling is telling us something about what the public are telling us about the content of our institutions. But our discussion was dominated on the route or the route a citizen might engage in to nominate someone rather than the term, which we saw as a side issue in comparison to the core issue, which was the citizens own the Constitution. So really they should have a route to make sure that they have a vehicle to protect that Constitution, and it shouldn't be the preserve of the political parties.
Okay, Catherine, thank you very much. Could we maybe move on to the next slide, the arguments against the proposition that what about the issue here that if you reduce this presidential term from 7 to 5 years, it would make the office more party political? And could I ask Table 10 to comment on that?
Sorry, I just feel I shouldn't speak because I'm a politician, just in light of what's been said, so I was trying to get one of the others to... Yeah, all right.
Stephen Fitzpatrick, I'm the facilitator for the table. There were no volunteers to step into the breach. Essentially, it was felt, I think there was a general consensus around the table that if you ran the elections concurrent with the local elections and the European elections, that the issues that would arise in those elections, basically the choosing between the different political parties, would mean that it was more likely that the office of the president would be affected by those concerns, and you'd have more chance of the eventual election being based on party lines, whereas in previous elections that wasn't the case for president. different political party support didn't correlate with the eventual presidential votes.
Okay, thanks, Stephen. I mean, maybe that point that you've just expressed there is somewhat connected to the next bullet point, combining with local and yours would distract attention. I presume that means distract attention from the office of president. And could table 13 perhaps comment on this?
PJ Murray is the name. We did feel that if it was held in conjunction with the local elections and the European elections, that it would politicise the office, and we didn't think that was. We thought that in Ireland the president is non-political and definitely has been after they were being elected. So I think it'd be impossible for people that would vote for their party at local elections and at European elections, then to change their mind to vote for a president, that wasn't in that party.
Okay,
So-
thanks very much, PJ. Let me slightly change the format here. Looking at some of these bullet points, is there somebody wishes to comment on any, without me selecting out one of them, somebody wants to comment on some of the points that are up there on the slide?
Hi guys, my name is Chris Lyons, and I think that our table pretty much were unanimous that we didn't want to change the term. But one of the main reasons that I didn't want the term changed is because, well, 7 years being a run, that's pretty prohibitive in length. It would only have applicants that wanted to apply for the job and that wanted to see it out for 7 years. And to not make a kind of a footnote in a CV rather than a career out of the presidency. Equally, it was kind of a generational thing for me, so it has a kind of a nostalgia factor, as in Mary McAleese had a run of 14 years, which is a substantial amount of time for someone who was born into her presidency and leaves. It was a surprise to my baby brother that we even had to re-elect a president. So, to my mind, it has no reason to change. I don't particularly see a reason why it, and I think the whole table kind of agreed, because we're a cool table.
Okay. Yeah. Thanks, Chris.
Hi, I'm John Kenny. We came up that we would want it to be reduced to 5 years, but that we wouldn't want it to be concurrent with the local or the European. Just for, one of the reasons was because it would be problematic if the president resigns or died in office, because we felt that any of the substitute options to what would happen in the intermediate term, we felt that they'd be inefficient. So, yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. I think there's a comment here.
Thank you. I just want to make a comment on behalf of the table, and I can't get anyone to volunteer to do it, but they'll all tell me what they'd like me to say. We feel that sometimes with the way our discussion is going is that we're in danger of belittling the role of the president. The president has a much greater role than simply the power to do X, Y, Z. He has a great, or he or she has a great symbolism and a great sense of dignity and authority, which we think shouldn't be belittled by making reducing it or belittling it anyway. But the main point we have is that the length of term issue may not really be the primary obstacle to opening up the nomination process. We think the nomination process is the biggest single obstacle. And secondly, even on that particular thing, because of the reduction in the number of TDs and the reduction in the number of councillors, this is going to become more critical, because according to the Constitution, the number is set, but then those numbers are actually going down. We think that's going to be quite a problem. And the other issue, which has been felt very strongly, is that there should be a cap on expenditure. This also is a very limiting issue, that the expenditure really needs to be capped way below what it is at the present time. That reflects, I think, fairly what we say here.
Okay, thank you very much, Michael. Now, I think actually your comment is a good segue into some of the. We have 2 slides now of other comments, and these are what they are. I mean, particularly the one you referred to there, change the nomination rules. A lot of people, a lot of the tables have made these comments, and I'm going to take out of that list the first 2 of those tables who want to comment. Sorry. Table 2 and yourself. Okay, Keith. Or
Keith, Kildare North constituency. When we discussed it, slight inside joke on the politicians talking. When we discussed the presidency, the barrier of entry was a big factor in our conversation. One thing I came up with, or we discussed, was having public votes, public nominations. So I could put myself forward for presidency if I got 20,000 signatures, something like that, rather than going down the current route. Anything else? Thank you.
yeah. Could we just be clear from a factual point of view, the precise rules that are there in order to be nominated to run for president?
I can. I actually can't off the top of my head. A number of members of the Oireachtas and also local councils. But I think the point you were making, and it's the point that lots of tables were making as I went around, was about having a citizen involvement in terms of being able to select presidential candidates. And the point I made to lots of tables was that Ireland is very unusual in not having that procedure. So for most countries where there's a directly elected president, of a style that's like Ireland's, so again, excluding Latin American countries, the US, those sorts of countries, then virtually all have some element of citizens being able to choose presidential candidates. It can depend a lot in terms of the threshold as a percentage of the population. It could be quite a large percentage or a much smaller percentage. But virtually every country has citizens able to choose or to play a role in choosing presidential candidates.
The other table that was offering on this was table 12.
Thanks, Chairman. My name is Owen Finnegan. Our table agreed by unanimous vote that it should be stayed at 7 years. And our main concern was also the nomination of the President. And as Senator Norris pointed out, sorry, David pointed out,
well
that,
done.
that finance is a very restrictive measure, and that the rules should be changed, that the money that goes towards, we'll say, leaflets and pamphlets and that could be reduced drastically in order that the candidates get fully compensated, and that also the candidates can use their own innovative ways as well for advertising and for canvassing. And speaking of which, I'm canvassing you all for a vote for a part of the steering committee. I just thought I'd take this opportunity. Thank you.
That's what I call adept politics. Could we move on to the final slide, Robert? Because there's a couple of interesting things here, and one is this very first one, that lower the candidate age. At the moment, my understanding is that you have to be 35 years to be able to be offered as a candidate. Again, I'm offering the first 2 tables on this out of 1, 2, 3, 7, 8, 7, 9, 10. And is there any? All of those tables have spoken up to now, I think, haven't they? No. Okay. In that case, could we start with 7, and then we'll have 10 after you.
Hello, Pat Brazel. We discussed the vacancy, and we said if it's not broken, don't fix it. So the party candidates and the changing of the oath, if you remember, serves me right, the oath says you must swear allegiance to God. And the lowering of the candidate ages, we were very unanimous on that. And the maximum age for the candidacy as well. So, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. What about table 10, who have views on this as well?
Tom Burke again, Chairman. I'm getting lumbered, I'm afraid. We feel that 34 is too old as a minimum age. I can remember when I was 21, I was saying, why the hell can I not stand? Now, there are lots of reasons why I couldn't stand, but the age limit was the thing that jumped out at me at the time, 34. If you want to get the young people active in politics, you have to have candidates that are closer to their age. You're not going to interest 18, 20, 25-year-olds in 34-year plus. And that, combined with the present selection system, makes for a small poll. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. There is, of course, then this other suggestion on this slide to have table 6 came up with the notion that there should be a maximum age for which I think is probably illegal, but and so maybe could table 6 get up and see why you are assessing in a constitutional convention why you're proposing illegality.
Let me first say I am canvassing for Brian for the steering committee here. Jerry Farrell, we had a big debate on this around the table. Not everybody agreed, but it was an interesting debate that if we have a lower age of 35 for the presidency, maybe we should have a maximum age as well. Now, I know I'm going to be accused here of ageism, but if, for example, you're going to go for 14-year term, maybe we should be looking at an age limit. So that was generally it.
Okay, all right. I presume nobody else wants to comment on that. Robert, could we turn to you now? I mean, we may have a bit of time to come back to the floor, but I mean, you had a number of issues that were raised. You picked up in the course of the roundtable debate. There's some other of the comments that have been made now. Do you want to try and summarise or synthesise what you've heard?
Yeah, I was asked certain questions when I went round, some of which have come up. I was asked one specific question, whether it's relevant anymore, I'm not quite sure, but which was about turnout at the last 3 presidential elections. And I can tell you it was 64% in 1990, 47.6 in 97, and 56.1 in 2011. So it's varied, but it's always been lower than at Dáil elections, basically. So that's just the facts of the situation. In terms of the age, minimum age of candidates, I was looking through various constitutions there, and a lot of them don't have it in the constitution. It's something that's set by law, which makes it much easier to change, for one thing, but therefore I can't tell you what the minimum age is because it's not in the constitution. However, where I did find it, I found that the age was 35, so the same age as in Ireland, in Austria, in Iceland, in Poland, and in Portugal. So those would be countries with, some of them have slightly stronger presidents than the Irish presidency, but they would be pretty similar. So 35 is not unusual in that way. And in fact, in Bulgaria, Lithuania, and Macedonia, again, which have really quite weak presidencies, again, the minimum age was 40. I actually, in the list of countries with non-executive presidents that were directly elected, 35 was actually the lowest age that I found in the constitution. Now that was just on a sort of a trawl at the back there on my system. There might be a few more, but it doesn't seem as if 35 is out of line with other countries equivalent countries, if you like. I also had a look. I should have done it really for the briefing, so apologies for that. But I had a look at whether how many countries had aligned presidential and European elections. It's very difficult to get, at least as it was there, to get information about local elections, but it's fairly easy to get information about aligning presidential and European elections, and I couldn't find a single country with a directly elected president who had aligned it with the European elections as well. So it doesn't seem to be happening. It might possibly happen with local elections, but it doesn't seem to be happening with presidential elections. One point that came up again when I was going around the tables, and just to sort of clarify what I was saying in the briefing and in the presentation, I'm talking about the cost of campaigns. When I was making the presentation, I was really focusing on the cost to the taxpayer. I wasn't focusing on the cost to presidential candidates. So there are ways in which you can cost the cost to the taxpayer, but the point was made to me by more than one person that the cost to the presidential candidates is very high, and that can be prohibitively high to allow people to stand, and so that we need to factor that in as well. And the sort of similar point was made that if you say, well, okay, having more presidential elections will cost the taxpayer more, therefore will reduce the amount of expenses that are reimbursed, and we'll find different ways of doing leafleting. Then the point was made that if those reductions are made, then that actually might increase the control, further increase the control that political parties have on the campaign, because effectively the only people who will be able to stand are ones that can be sort of guaranteed of some sort of party support. So just to make it clear that I was talking about the cost of the taxpayer, but there is a separate issue that's a very valid issue about the cost to candidates as well, the personal cost that candidates have to undertake to stand for the presidency. Perhaps just one more general point. It's sort of, I think, coming out in these comments is that in some senses here there are two values maybe. So this has nothing to do with facts. It's not whether the age is 35 in Montenegro or anything like that, but there's two sort of values I think that underpin a lot of the sorts of issues that are coming up. One of those values is engagement, and you see in the arguments for reducing the president's term, people talking about turnout, people talking about participation. If that's the thing that you value most of all, then it could be that you think that reducing the president's term might be very important in that way. But that's a value really. It's not a fact that I can tell you about. That's how you feel about what the president should be. I think the second value, and they're not mutually exclusive, but in some senses they tend to come up as if they were separate factors in the debate, is the type of presidency that we want. And most people want a president that's above parties, a process that's not controlled by parties, a non-partisan president. And a lot of people, when they want that, they see that as the most important value, tend to say, well, we should have a presidency of 7 years. We shouldn't reduce the term because the presidency at the moment is like that. So why change it? So I think, in some ways it might possibly help the way you think about things to think, well, what do you want from the system? What do you want from the presidency? Do you value most of all participation, in which case maybe reducing the term might increase that? Or do you value most a type of president that's as above party politics as possible, in which case maybe a longer term might help? That says nothing about the nomination processes, which going around the tables I know was really what you were, most of you anyway, were interested in. And it is certainly the case, and I guess I made the point earlier, so I won't repeat myself, but just to confirm that Ireland does have a very restrictive process for nominating its candidates. In most equivalent countries, in fact not just in most equivalent countries, in most countries it is it's much easier to stand, but it's certainly less controlled by political parties, and citizens have much more involvement. But I think one thing we haven't talked about that relates to that is that there is a difference between standing for election and winning election. So in countries where citizens are able to nominate candidates, or citizens are able to nominate themselves and then get an amount of signatures from people on the voting register to stand, that might mean that they can stand for election, but it might mean that they absolutely stand no chance whatsoever of winning. So it's very common to see in countries where you get 7, 8, 9 presidential candidates, partly because the system is more open, that 4, 5, 6 of those candidates get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5% of the vote at the very least. and you get 2 or 3, perhaps 4 candidates at the most, that the election is really between. So it might be good to have more candidates standing, different candidates standing, but I think it's also worth thinking at the same time as whether this will actually change the type of president you get, because it could be that you have more and different types of candidates standing, but it could be that you get presidents with party support still being elected. So it might not change who is actually in the presidency. So it's worth just keeping those two things separate, I think.
Thank you very much. David, did you want to, or anyone there want to add anything to any of the comments?
I think Robert's provided a very, very good summary.
Okay. We have a few minutes left, but is there anyone else that feels the spirit rising in them to comment on well, now you've spoken twice already, and so have you. So is there anyone else who, Alban, you've spoken as well. You haven't, and you haven't. So could we go yourself, table 1 and table 8, please?
Hi, Ray Brown. I just wanted to know, have we asked any of the presidents what they think about it? Whether the term should be reduced or not, since the past presidents? Do we know anything about that?
I just say that there was Michael D. Higgins did give an interview with the Irish Times in which he said he wanted to keep the term at 7 years, just before Christmas. So he's the only one I know that's expressed a particular preference on that issue.
Yeah. I mean, again, I think it's up for the presidents, former presidents, to express a view on that themselves. I don't think it's for us to ask them, but if the view is on the public record, I think we should know about it. Yeah, table 8.
John Crotty, I'd like to ask Robert, the way we currently nominate the presidential candidates, is it more like the Chinese way of nominating candidates or Western democracies? I was surprised to hear that Ireland's the only country that you're aware of where the citizens don't get a hand or part in nominating the candidate.
It's not quite the only country, but the two countries that come to mind that have very restrictive procedures are Mongolia and Namibia. So whereas when you look at countries like Czech Republic, Central East European countries, they tend to be much more open. So it's whether that's Chinese style, I don't know, but nonetheless, Ireland's not necessarily the only country.
Susan, sorry, could we have the table just behind you, Mary? Yeah.
Hello, my name is Susan Brady. I'd just like to ask one question. Has there been any president elected that has been non-political?
Yeah, I think that's the correct answer. Douglas Hyde. He was the first president under the current constitution. I'm sorry? Was he Fianna Fáil? Okay.
So we've only had one president elected to date that has been non-political.
I may stand corrected over there.
Sorry?
Robert, are you able to enlighten us on that?
So we have had no president elected to date that has been non-political. So therefore, how can we say that is a non-political post?
I think there's a difference between non-political and non-partisan. I think if you're standing for election and if you are a president, then you are political because you're part of the political process. I think there's a difference between that and being partisan, i.e. a member of a political party or being a candidate that is officially endorsed by a political party. And there, it's slightly difficult sometimes because some candidates say that they are independent, whereas they are supported by parties, funded by parties. Even other candidates, again, sometimes it's difficult to separate out or difficult to determine how partisan they are, even if it's a part of the spin that they try and sometimes say that they're non-partisan when they are supported. So I think it wouldn't be, you're right, and so it's not right to say that nobody has been non-partisan, but perhaps some have been less partisan than others.
Table 5 there.
Hetty Tui. I expect good respect for the President because putting it into the political parties the last time, I had a bad taste in my mouth for the way it was operated. So I think there should be respect for the President in his position.
Yeah, well, I think that's probably a very generally shared view, and it was Michael that expressed the same view a bit earlier. Table 13.
My name is Peter Halligan from Cork. During the discussion, it was kind of reflecting on the diaspora. They aren't the only people that might like to vote. We were talking about in the north of Ireland, as the President represents Ireland, that maybe people up there who want to vote could also vote as well in presidential elections. And there was one other point when we were talking about it being pointless and it changes nothing. We were saying that it was more, there's no need to change it, then any change wouldn't be effective, which is slightly different. Thanks.
Okay. Thank you. A few minutes left. I may now stray back into having somebody who has spoken before. Okay, Derek.
I was just prompted to mention a point that I'd mentioned during discussions. I was somebody at our table who advocated for the 4-year term, albeit I was in a minority of one. But the point I just wanted to make, and I thought it helped to focus on the issue, was that somebody who is 17 years of age, it may be the case where they become 31 or they're 31 years of age before they have the opportunity of voting in their first presidential election. And it seems just a very long time. So I just wanted to make that point. Thank you.
Thank you. James. Mike here. Sorry, wait for the mic.
Just, I feel there should be a greater role for the President in reaching out to the diaspora, particularly acknowledging the huge contribution of the various county associations and their contribution to the Irish abroad. And I mean, this has never been acknowledged by the state, and I feel there could be a role for the President acknowledging their contributions. Some of those associations are in existence well over 100 years, over a century, and they have contributed enormously to lonely Irish people who went abroad in very, very difficult times in the past, and indeed at the present time, and I think there should be a role. Also, I feel that we have tapped in on the Irish embassies for the gathering this year, and I mean, my own county launched the gathering in the Irish embassy in London, and I feel that, you know, there is a role for a president here, and maybe once we can, or once every 5 years, acknowledging the contribution of the embassies and indeed the associations to helping and supporting the Irish abroad.
I think, in fairness, and the last, since Mary Robinson onwards, since the presidency has perhaps become more active, there's considerable within presidential programs when there's visits to overseas. There's a very real effort to connect with Irish people who've contributed, and both Mary Robinson and Mary McAleese made a particular effort when they were in Africa, for example, to acknowledge the role of missionaries, which was very appropriate. And now we're coming towards the end, but there are a few people who I do want to. Aideen, I think you were first.
I just wanted to highlight one point, Chairperson. I think that maybe our table feels hasn't really come out sufficiently. We were all, like Table 5, unanimous in that we didn't feel the 7-year term should be changed. Part of our reason for that is we believe the term of the President should exceed the potential term of any Oireachtas, and that it should be, particularly because the President has the role in protecting the Constitution, that no government should know that its term should coincide with that of the President, because it would, by virtue of the length of the term, make it more party political. That was the reason why we felt the 7-year term was important. But we also felt that 14 years was too long. That, I mean, really at the end of the day, 7 years was long enough for somebody to give their best contribution. And 14 years, to be fair, you know, even the best president in the world would feel fatigue. But there was also the point that it was anti-democratic because nobody will contest, in reality, against an incumbent. In other words, the balance of convenience is for the incumbent, and no political parties we've seen in the past will put up a candidate against an incumbent. Therefore, we felt that it should be seriously considered limiting the term of the presidency to one term of 7 years.
Thank you. Alban, I know you were trying to get in earlier.
The point I was making was in relation to Northern voters. I think it's very important. I think one of the important contributions that Mary Robinson made, and this was consolidated by Mary McAleese, was the fact that her presence was visibly felt in the north. And it became almost routine. But she became the president, not just of the 26 counties, but the whole island and all the people of the island, and not just the nationalist people, because remember, Mary Robinson and Mary McAleese was welcomed very, very warmly by Unionists and Protestants as well. So she became a president for all the people. So the logic of that is, if that is true and if that has been effective, and I think historically I'm right, then the logic of that is to extend the franchise to those living in Northern Ireland who wish to exercise that vote.
Thank you very much. David, you've been remarkably restrained for the last hour. So.
Thank you very much, David Norris. But I think it's important that people should be reminded here and watching, if they are still watching on the internet, that all the political parties took part in a review of the Constitution in 1998. They said very clearly that the nomination process of the presidency was unfair and undemocratic. And they made 3 suggestions which have been echoed just by spontaneously here today by the people representing the people of Ireland. And they were, number 1, that the requirement for a Oireachtas nomination should be reduced from 20 to 10, that a petition of 10,000 citizens should have the power, giving back the power. The presidency does not belong to the political parties. And I was furious to hear one person say, it's our turn, our party has never had the presidency. It doesn't belong to any party, it belongs to the people. And the third was that it should stay with the county councils. But I think it's shameful that they used the whip against candidates. That's not an appropriate use of local government. And I think we should call their bluff and say, you all agreed this. You produced legislation, then you withdrew it. And then my colleague here, Catherine Murphy, put one down recently, and the government, the same parties, voted against it. That's what I call political hypocrisy. I have no vested interest. I will not be running again, but I would like to see it opened up. And I'll tell you one other thing. It is ruinous if you get involved, if you don't reach the quota, but that's fine. I've no quibble with that. That's the game I entered. I'm not complaining. But bear in mind, the political parties have skewed the system against the people financially as well. They can give goods and services. They can provide transport, offices, posters, leaflets, the whole works. And it's never counted in by the standards in public office. And an individual citizen fights against that. I think it's wrong. I think in a democracy, we should be a little bit more equal. And I hope the next election will open it up. 14 years without an election. Nobody under 32 ever voted in a presidential election in this country. They were getting ready to do the same again this time. And I'm glad I pushed my nose in, because that finished that little game for them. People would have been over 40 before they'd voted. And I think that treats the president with contempt.
Keith, I think, yeah, clarification, yeah. Okay.
You said the government made these 3 suggestions years ago. I'm just wondering why it wasn't enacted. Who stopped it? I understand the soundbite. I'm looking for specifics. Why did the government just drop it?
Because it's their power. It was their report. They created the legislation, and then they voted against passing it. I can tell you it's the same with the Senate. We've had all these reports about the Senate as well. It is hypocrisy. It's not just a soundbite, it's the truth. I mean, every time I have tabled the reports to reform Shannon Éireann, and every time the government has voted them down, every time, their own reports, governments of all hue and all complexion. That's what you're dealing with. And I think it's time their bluff was called on this issue of the presidency and on the Senate, which they've specifically excluded, the major constitutional change in my lifetime. And you are not allowed to talk about it. It's like the Vatican.
Thank you.
Thanks. I think I should put a slight, perhaps, context, Keith, because it is important that what David referred to, this Constitutional Review Committee, was chaired by Dr. Ken Whitaker, and it went through the Constitution line by line, and it made a lot of recommendations, but they weren't effectively followed up, and it goes well beyond the specific comment that they made. Yeah, no, I appreciate that. Finbar.
Finbar O'Brien. We had the two lady presidents we had, they represented the country super. And they were known everywhere, and they really put up a great show for the country. The last election that came up, it made a farce of the whole show with the way it went on, the dirt was dug out, and it just ruined everything. It ruined everything, it spoiled everything. Like, we have a president, great man and everything, but what went on to get him there, it just took away from everything else before that. And I don't think you should go down that road again.
Okay. Thank you very much. Okay, I think we'll bring this discussion to an end now. As with the first topic, you will now think about this overnight, and we will have a ballot paper with you tomorrow morning